my dad got accepted to grad school to get his doctorate degree. And it was about to be my senior year in high school, and I was a big mucky muck, or I thought I was a big mucky muck. I was going to be editor of the Spartan Scroll, the school newspaper. I was in student government. My mom had died the year before, and I had spent the year taking care of younger siblings. And when he got accepted, it was like, no, I don't want to move to Detroit. It's my senior year. So he had taught at Vaughn Street School. And the woman who was the office manager there said, I have 3 boys. They're all in college. I've always wanted a girl. This one comes potty trained. It's like, she can live with me. I was like, yes. So my dad said yes. And he moved with the rest of the family to Detroit. And I moved to Sepulveda. And I commuted in my little 67 Mustang every day, 10 miles to SYLMAR High School. And so that's where I was. My alarm didn't go off till 6:30. So I was in bed, sound asleep. And the floor in my bedroom was hardwood. And the bed that I was on had little tiny wheels on it. So when the first jolt came, the bed just rolled across the room. And then the aftershock hit and it rolled back and hit the wall. But in a way, it was great because I didn't like slam into anything. The bed just kept rolling. But it went on for quite a while. So I called out to Molly and Dave, my surrogate parents for the year. And we ascertained that we were all still alive. And then we got up and kind of assessed what was going on. And a lot of broken things. The kitchen was a mess. Molly was the quintessential New York Jewish mother who was always cooking and baking. And so it was just gooey messes all over the floor. Everything in the refrigerator and the pantry had just come out. But no major cracks, no gas leaks or anything. And she said, you're not going to school today. And she was right. I had no idea how bad it was. We had phone service for a teeny bit. And I remembered I had to call my folks in Detroit because I know that news gets amplified, as the media gets it. It's like all of Los Angeles wiped off the map. So I called to say we've had a horrid earthquake, but we're okay. And then we lost phone, we lost power, we lost water for a while. I can't remember how long the school was out, but I think it was a week or 2. Did anybody else say? It was a while. And looking back, I have no idea how we made all that time up because we graduated on schedule and went to grad night at Disneyland like everybody else. So I don't know how we did that, but we did. But then I think the next day, because we lived in the flat area, there was quite a concern with the Earth and Van Norman Dam breaching. There were a lot of cracks in that. And so they evacuated the whole flatlands of the valley, which was about 80,000 people. And we were in that area. So I think the boundaries went from either the San Diego Freeway or maybe Van Nuys Boulevard on the east to Balboa or Corbinish on the west and Ventura Boulevard on the south. And the north was like where the Golden State Freeway cut into the 405. So my house was just east of Balboa and Nordhoff and a little bit north. So we were definitely in the evacuation. Like if that dam burst, we would have been toast. So I had no family in the area. I was with Molly and Dave for the year. She had a teacher at Vaughn Street School who provided us shelter, and we evacuated to this teacher's house who lived in the hills of Encino, high enough up that we didn't have to worry about being drowned. And we went there for a few days. Dave was an accountant and worked in the Mid-Wilshire district, so he kept going to work. Molly, after a couple days, went to work, and we realized that we had left behind medicine when we evacuated. I was driving my 67 Mustang and packed it to the gills with almost everything I could that I owned. And they packed their 2 cars and we drove out. And then when we realized there were essential items that we'd left behind, I volunteered to go back and get them because I had nothing else to do. I wasn't in school. They were both working. And what I remember, it was either the police or the National Guard or the Army or something. You had to show that you lived there. I had to show my driver's license that said I lived on Gerald Avenue, or they wouldn't let me into the area. And I had to say why I was there. And it was one of the eeriest memories I have, because 80,000 people were gone, just somewhere else. So there were no cars on the road and there were no people around. And it was eerily quiet, no sound. It was like, I don't know, a nuclear war had just wiped everybody off the planet. So I drove up to our house. None of the neighbors were there. There were no cars. I pulled into the driveway. I got into the house. I found the medicine. And it wasn't like a, wow, this is so quiet and serene, I'll hang out. It was, no, this is really creepy, silent. I got to get out of here. And so I wish that I had had the presence of mind or the lack of fear to go, you're never going to hear this again. This is a pretty cool thing. And it's your own house, so you might as well explore. And it's never going to be this quiet again. But I was too creeped out. So I left and took the medicine and went back to Encino. And I think they were worried about looting.
Yes.
Especially when 80,000 people are gone and the entire valley is empty. It's a paradise if you're a looter and you can get in, you know? It's like there's nobody that's going to report you, see you, you know, there's no security cams. It was very frightening. And then as aftershocks continued, and when you mentioned PTSD and, you know, how do I react to earthquakes now? I wouldn't say I have PTSD, but I think I'm much more sensitive to earthquakes than I would be had I not done this at the age of 16, living with friends of the family. I mean, the ones that we had a week ago, I don't know what it was, 4:30 in the morning. I can't remember. But the first one hit and I immediately was up and I went, 4.1, 4.2, 4. It was like, and when I found out later, it's like, yeah, you're dead on. And then the two others that hit, it was like 3 point something. It's like I have this inner Richter scale in me now that sensitized me to this because that was so nasty. And then the Northridge one at 7 point whatever, it was like, I'm gun shy when it comes to earthquakes. I don't like them at all. It says the rise and fall of SYLMAR, and it had Patty's and my picture because we had just been named editor for the fall for that year. So, so we had a lot of pictures. I think we talked to a lot of people who lived in the area. That's how we found out that people were going to I can't remember what it was called, the artesian well that was on the corner of Maclay and something, or Sayer and something, to get water because everybody had to boil water. So we talked to people, we talked to the administration about what kind of repairs were going to be needed. But I think everybody was in recovery mode. I mean, frankly, it did not feel as important a reporting job because there was so much other reporting going on as earlier in that year when I got to cover the Sirhan trials. I guess it was the year before. And that felt more momentous because it was more national to me as a reporter, and that I beat out like Time and Newsweek, you know, to get a seat in the courtroom. So, but I did feel that we had a responsibility. And yet I also felt like being in SYLMAR, I wasn't reporting anything that anybody who lived there didn't already know. They'd already lived through it. It wasn't like I was going to tell you something you didn't know and you were going to read the newspaper and go, oh, I didn't know that. I mean, yes, you're going to find out things from talking to your friends, but I didn't have any groundbreaking news on this issue. I remember there were places that were roped off, like, I don't know if this will focus on this picture, but there's a handrail here and a big crack in the stairs going down. And that whole exit coming from a building was just had caution tape. You weren't allowed to use it anymore, even though it didn't go anywhere, but it was, you could kick your foot on it, or it was structurally unsound. Hands down, David Mickelson, because his mom died. I mean, not that we were trying to top it, but that was the biggest tragedy, is his mom was killed. And at 6 a.m. and no warning. And not only did the Mickelsons have to go through an earthquake, but they lost their mom too. So that was the one that stuck with me. And I think it has forever changed the way David Mickelson functions in the world. And it's very, very sad. Other people, the idea of hearing friends talk about having to go to that artesian well on Sayre and get their water and or get some water and boil it, and I think the National Guard came with water, but because I didn't live in Sylmar, we still had to boil water in Encino, but and in Sepulveda when we got back in the house, but I didn't. Once we got out and the dam didn't break, I didn't fear for my life anymore. I did get more scared as I would go to school, though, because it was the SYLMAR quake. It was like, oh my God, what if it happens again? What if there's another aftershock? What if it happens in the middle of the day when everybody's in school? This could be really devastating. So I think I was more nervous, but the only other friend whose house was really damaged and she couldn't live in it was Julie Lee, who was my best friend at the time. And she lived on Cobalt, and her house was so damaged that they had to move out, and they moved in with cousins who lived right off of Parthenia and Balboa, which was near to where I was living. So for a while, Julie and I carpooled, which was a weird thing to think about, driving down to Parthenia, picking her up at her cousin's house, and then driving 10 miles to Sylmar to go back to school. My house my childhood home that I grew up in was on Larkspur Street, right where Foothill and Roxford meet-ish. And my dad had sold it. It was on the market for a long time. He had helped build it in 1950. And we moved in when I was 6 months old. So the end of 1954, I think. And my dad was teaching at Sylmar Elementary School at the time. So we lived in this great house, very rural, lots of horses, blah, blah, blah. And, but when my dad got accepted to Wayne State and had to move and had to, buy another house, it was like, I got to sell the house in Sylmar. Don't think we're coming back. And he had trouble selling it. And so he was paying 2 mortgages between the Detroit house and the Sylmar house. And at one point he was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to default on this. I don't know what to do. I'm a graduate assistant, with 5 kids. And so he sold it finally 3 weeks before the Sylmar earthquake. And the escrow closed, all the final papers, and the people who bought it, and I drove by when I got to go back to school, it was red tagged. It was like, oh man, Papa built this house. It got repaired. It's still there. I've been back to visit, and I talked to the guy who said, wow, your dad did a good job on this house. It's great. But the guy who bought it from my dad walked away from it. Whatever his deposit was and whatever he lost in escrow, it was less than it was going to cost him to finish paying off the house and to do all the repairs. So he let the bank take it over, and it got resold at some point. And my dad was like, phew.